everyone for tuning in to yet another episode in which I vlog about issues related to public transportation. I did not know what to talk about today, but then I was asked about something by a journalist, and as a result, I started diving into the list of the Northeast Corridor Commission projects. Now, already in chatting through the card, there is a link to the broader document. It is called it's a process called NEC Future or NEC Commission. NEC for people who are first timers or I don't know, second or third timers as opposed to 40th timers is the Northeast Corridor, most important railway in the United States, most important passenger rail line in the United States, and connecting Boston, New York, Philadelphia, and Washington. So massive, massive population counts and a giant travel market, of which the corridor accounts for very little, owing to high ticket prices and kind of meh speeds and frequencies. So the issue is that to try to turn it into high-speed rail, there have been plans upon plans for about 60 years. I don't know if it was the second line in the world to be almost high-speed rail or something like that. In the 1960s already, they had something called the High-Speed Ground Transportation Act, which turned New York to Washington into something that was very much not high-speed rail. Like at the time, there were already high-speed trains running in Japan. The average speed between Tokyo and Shinosaka at the time of the Hikari was, I believe, 170 kilometers an hour, 510 kilometers, 3 hours express trains. And here it was, I think, 3 hours for 360. But speeds that were broadly competitive with the express trains in, let's say, Western Europe that the high-speed trains of the 1980s and onward would replace. And then the corridor stagnated. And the problem is when you have so much cruft accumulating over 60 years of a lot of shelf art, a lot of plans that went nowhere or turned into duds, is that there are lots of people who think that certain things are obviously necessary that aren't, and then there's very little long-range planning, and this is essentially the theme of what we're going to see. So the NEC, so all these plans, NEC Future, NEC Commission is the organization that's involved, that are trying to improve the corridor. Like it's something that Americans who are into this kind of transportation, including a lot of important politicians, genuinely want. It is not a throwaway. It is not something that nobody cares about. Quite to the contrary, it's something that it's something that is important at the highest levels of government. I talked to I'm not going to tell you which politicians or which staffers, but I've talked to staffers of fairly important politicians from the region, and they seem interested, and they seem interested in the subject, and especially interested even when I'm expressly talking about ruffling feathers, like maybe knocking down some houses in rich suburbs to build this. So this is not some kind of throwaway. It's just something that is being severely mismanaged, and we're going to look at why through the list of projects that are included. And as you look at the list, I'm going to use the expression staple job. Now, what is a staple job? A staple job is a term that I learned from math PhDs in the United States and then Europe. So I got mine in the United States, where the norm is that a thesis needs to be a readable document. Now, I don't mean readable to the general public, quite to the contrary. Even in, let's say, history, which is a field where the literature is much more readable than my field, math, theses are not expected to be readable by the general public. You're expected to then turn your thesis into a book project, which is readable by the general public, but the thesis itself is for the experts. But it's still readable to the experts. Like someone in your field should be able to read it. So they're supposed to be coherent documents with a beginning, a middle, and an end. In math, where math papers don't have a beginning, a middle, and an end, have a beginning and a body. Theses often are written like this, but they're still going to give a lot more background, essentially. That's, again, the American norm. The European norm in math is that you write papers in grad school. It's pretty normal. And then you essentially staple them together. So the thesis is something, maybe you write an introduction, and then you say, chapter one is this paper, chapter two is this paper, chapter three is this paper, staple them. This is the expression staple job. So things that are not necessarily connected, I mean, they probably are in practice going to be connected because the candidate wrote all of them, the PhD candidate wrote these papers, and therefore they're probably going to be in the same research program, but they don't have to connect with each other. Now I'm using this expression staple job, which to be very clear is a I'm using this expression not paper job, staple job, which to be very clear is which should be very clear is a fairly neutral term when you discuss European versus American norms of dissertations. And I'm using it in a much more negative sense of something that is essentially a bunch of different plans that were stapled together without coordination. And what I mean is that, and we're going to say that at a bunch of places that are things here that are clearly on the wish list of, let's say, Amtrak, things on the wish list of the MBTA for the Boston region. Now, Amtrak and the MBTA share tracks between Boston and Providence, but there was very little. At this point, I might even suggest no coordination between Amtrak and the MBTA for what to do about this Boston to Providence corridor so that they can work together. Same thing in other areas where Amtrak and different commuter railways share tracks, New York to New Haven, New York to Trenton, the Philadelphia region, the Washington region. And so there's a layer of lack of coordination between Amtrak and commuter trains. There's also a lack of coordination with state governments, which now the commuter trains are run by state governments, but state governments often, in addition, have their own plans, usually around big signatures. So, for example, in New York, the signature would be a rebuilding of Penn Station, which is specifically not a project that the commuter railways are very interested in. What is the commuter railway? Sorry, what are the commuter railways to Penn Station? It's the Long Island Railroad, which doesn't give a shit because it is not in the Northeast Corridor, and New Jersey Transit, which does and is. But New Jersey Transit does want Penn Station expansion. They think it's necessary for them for capacity reasons, and they're wrong, and we're going to talk about this in a little bit. But what they really want is to take this two-track tunnel, the North River Tunnel. It's not the Lincoln, it's the one that's in black on Google Earth. And this is the busiest two-track railway, passenger or freight, I think, in North America. There are busier passenger lines than this one in Europe, but not that many. This runs 20, or before Corona, I'm not sure about now, 24, sometimes 25 trains per hour into Penn Station at rush hour. Which again, it's a figure that exists in Europe, but it does not exist in every little European city. It does not exist in Berlin, for example. I think in Germany the only place it exists is Munich. Munich actually does 30. So very busy line, and they're planning to quad-track it essentially by adding a new two-track tunnel around this alignment called Gateway. This is something that New Jersey is really interested in, and we're going to talk about this in a bit. This is a good project, just overpriced. But in addition to this poor integration between Amtrak and, in this case, New Jersey Transit, there's also the layer of New York State and city officials wanting to rebuild Penn Station as kind of a prestige project, as a signature train station that is going to cost a lot of money and so suck. So all of these layers of local and regional wish lists, including Amtrak's own wish list. Amtrak views itself as an intercity operator. It does not view itself as the coordinator of intercity and regional railways on the Northeast Corridor. So because of this, often you have organizations that work at cross purposes. Even within the same organization, you might have multiple reasons to build the same project, and if they clash or if they appear to clash, sometimes the project ends up being I don't know what to even call something that is both overpriced and bad. So I don't mean something where you have something that looks really not. No, the Berlin North-South S-Bahn is not 24. The Berlin North-South S-Bahn is, I believe, 18. There's a section that is 21, but I believe it terminates at Potsdamer Platz and only goes south of Potsdamer Platz. So the through so and Potsdamer Platz is a four-track station. In the same way that there's a section of the Stadtbahn that has more than 18 because there are a bunch of lines that only run from Ostbahnhof going east, but there are four tracks from Ostbahn going east. So the core Stadtbahn is 18 and the core north-south tunnel is 18. And I don't want to rant about how Berlin is building a tunnel that it shouldn't, and that it should be, and that some of the things that it wants are doable with, for example, taking the north-south from 18 to 24. Different time. I may have already vlogged about this. Oh, Ben, about the inventory. Have I checked the inventory? I have not. Oh, right. Can't click. I have not, and I will in a moment. But inventory is this is so this is gonna so so as I said, the main thing is the staple job problem. The other problem is that we're going to see is the state of good repair black hole, especially for bridges. I don't know why, but a lot of these bridge replacements. So you're seeing all of these. So these are major backlog lists. The tunnel is not something that I would class with this. The tunnel is excessive, but the tunnel is something that I can benchmark. Because it's not a tunnel replacement. It's essentially building a new tunnel. Um, as it is, I happen to know how much tunnels should cost, having spent years of my life studying this topic. Bridge replacements are the stuff that I won't say it puzzles me, but also it's something that I'm very suspicious about, and I'm going to highlight some examples in a little bit. You have all these bridge replacements, which again I'm going to explain how they're different from the BMP tunnel replacement in a little bit. And these bridge replacements cost obscene amounts of money. Like it's cheaper at normal places in normal places to tunnel under all these rivers than what they're proposing. And so as I said, there's going to be the theme of lack of coordination. The theme of kind of blundering through because it's been 60 years, so they're not doing any kind of long range planning. Another theme we're going to look at as the state of good repair black hole, which includes the bridge replacements in particular. I'm not sure there are other big themes of this. And so, without further ado, now I saw a version of this file. See how so this is a spreadsheet that was not made by me, but by a terrifying grad student. I think he's a first-year grad student at Rutgers named Shaul Picker. He terrifies me. The breadth of knowledge, the depth of knowledge, both of them, that he has about the entirety of public transport and rail operations, especially in the New York area, is scary. Okay, I keep saying that I keep thinking. I think I said this a couple months ago when I was also streaming something that was inspired by him. He's very good at this in ways that that I wasn't. I mean, like he's what? I think 22, 23. I think he's 22. I think he was born 2000. So when I was 22, I did know some things about good rail operations and good rail practices, but essentially what I knew at the time was that New York builds for something like 7 times the cost of Paris, and nobody knows why. So at any rate, this document, you see that there's a copy of sheet 1, 2, 3, 4. There used to be a sheet 1 that had all of these projects but alphabetized, so we're going to have a slightly jump back and forth list, and we might just need to rely on not the Excel table, but you can call it Excel, the Google Drive table. So calling it an Excel table is a little bit like saying that I Googled something with DuckDuckGo, you know. And the uh, but with this, I think it's mostly cataloged north to south. And they are even saying how much they expect to spend. My head may be in the yeah, in a north-south order, it also has merits, and this is this one. So this is target expenditure over 5 years, which means that a lot of these big ticket projects, like the Gateway Tunnel, um, are only partially included because these are things that are supposed to be completed in the 30s, often late in the 30s. And they're saying that all of these combined should cost $45 billion. And to put things in perspective, at the average cost of building high speed rail in Germany, Germany is not a cheap country at all. Um, Boston to Washington would be $30 billion. Yeah, $30 billion. Um, and this is with German laziness about value engineering, which is awful. If you try to benchmark this to a French cost or a Spanish cost, Belgian cost, people make fun of Belgium all the time, but Belgium is not terrible at the actual construction part. There are other things that Belgium is terrible at related to public transport, but its high-speed rail construction costs are actually okay. Um, you benchmark to not even Spanish costs, which aren't usually low, French ones, Belgian ones, Northeast Corridor is about 20. But wait, the Northeast Corridor, part of it is already high-speed rail. For example, the stuff you need to do between Boston and Providence is not, you don't need to build 70 kilometers of high-speed railway because the line between Boston and Providence is, to a large approximation, I shouldn't say a large approximation, to a good approximation, already high-speed rail. You need to do very minor facelifts. So you subtract this section, you subtract the section from Providence to Kingston, which is also very fast. Um, and soon enough, you're getting to things that are not 20, they might be 15. I don't want to promise anything sub 15, and even 15 requires very good value engineering. And to be very clear, what value engineering means, it means driving a bulldozer over houses in very rich suburbs. Um, but the reason that it's 45 for a very small share of a program that is not anywhere near high speed rail is not because they're not driving a bulldozer over rich suburbs. It's about 11 other policy failures, none of which is especially political. A lot of it is just agency managers being dumb. I'm centering the role of the agency managers. Um, Quite a lot of stuff here is also bullshit because of politicians. Um, but at the most macro scale, I do not think that it's the politicians' fault, not this. Other things are. Um, to the extent that there's any kind of political blame, I would blame political appointees. So the sort of people who do not have the legitimacy of civil service expertise, but also don't have the legitimacy of having been elected or being close enough to the elected that they count as elected. So someone like the Secretary of Transportation in the United States, right, Pete Buttigieg. Um, he, I believe, the most significant office he's been elected to is mayor of South Bend. South Bend is not South Bend is not a large city at all, um, but he has the legitimacy uh, of a minister of. I mean, I'm not going to say minister of the state because which is a very French term, but he's a minister of the state. Hi, thanks, Frankie. Um, and so essentially has the legitimacy as if he's elected, whereas assistant secretary something something, some kind of political appointee at any rate, has none. And this includes agency heads who have been chosen not for expertise but for political convenience. Let's say let's put it like that. But these are still people who are again not actual politicians. Really important. So let's look at the program at the list of projects right now instead of talking about the list of projects. So okay, I don't want to. Okay, so starting from New England and going south. Um, okay. So I'm going to focus on the big ones. And this means that I'm probably going to miss a lot of $50 million things that should be $5 million things, just because I don't want to go item by item. I want to go over the big ones uh, and analyze them. So let's see. So for example, so here's an example of something that we're not going to do in the future. So the first item is back bay platform ventilation. What is back bay? Boston has a central business district, an American style central business district, so a few blocks of high rise here. However, Boston, pretty uniquely for an American city, also has near center job centers. This is something that is completely normal in a city like Munich, Berlin, Paris, Stockholm. In the United States, it's not that common. I think the places where it's most common are outside Boston, New York, and San Francisco. Maybe possibly Washington. In Washington, you have things like Arlington, but even Arlington, I mean, the Pentagon, you've seen how much parking it has. So the most significant of these secondary centers is called Back Bay, where you can also see these high rises as well. And as it happens, the intercity trains into Boston pass through Back Bay, so they also stop there, and it's treated as kind of a subsidiary Boston station. So they all make the same stops, Back Bay, then South Station. Tickets between the two stations. In theory, you're supposed to have a ticket, but nobody will check it. And then if you buy a ticket from any other station, commuter or intercity into Back Bay or South Station, it costs the same price. It's something that's actually pretty common in cities. Thank you, the court, for saying what I was about to say. So it's actually something. It's an arrangement that's pretty common in multi-station cities. Like in Berlin. I mean, sometimes I'm just going to buy a ticket to Ostbahnhof, close to where I live, and not Hauptbahnhof. In London, there's something called the London Station Group. And so Boston is like that. Now, the thing is, the line is unelectrified, or rather, it is wired. Amtrak runs electric trains, but the commuter trains are all diesel. And now South Station is in the open air. So there's a station building here, this is the station building, but the platforms are in the open air. Now there is an overbuild for the bus stop, but they make sure that the idling diesel engines are going to be in the open air. So there is a lot of noise and pollution from diesel, but it's not an enclosed space. Now Back Bay is underground. There's a little bit, I think there's a little bit of open space at the very end, but they can't make sure the diesel engine is there. And so the station actually has very poor ventilation, and notably high levels of indoor air pollution. So they've spent quite a lot of money that should have been spent on electrifying the system, which is not that expensive. The Providence line already, again, being wired. They would need to get electric trains, do some extra electrification, which we'll talk about in a bit. Maybe also electrify the Worcester line, which is completely unwired. And instead, what they're doing is they're spending more money. And this is the third of the third phase of this to improve platform ventilation. So this is an example of 34 million, which is completely useless because they should electrify. In fact, they're already planning to electrify. But as I said, no coordination. At the time the plans were made, Transit Matters had not yet proposed the electrification program, and if it had, Governor Baker would have ignored it as he has since. And certainly Amtrak did not nudge the MBTA to electrify, even though it is also good for Amtrak operations. Why? Because no, so it depends. Engines versus cab car. I think the engines are in the. So I think the engines might actually be in the open air part that's past the bus station. I don't remember this, but I believe the way it works is that the covered part is here and then the engines are here. And so Amtrak in the 1990s did electrify in a way that was supposed to be MBTA compatible, but since then it has not tried to push the MBTA on this. Instead, it has proposed getting out of the MBTA's way and vice versa at higher cost. I not see, no, no, okay. So now the next big, this is a big project we have to talk about it. South Station expansion. Thankfully, regional rail proof of concept. I'm going to avoid talking about Boston as much as I can because I already have. So there's so Google this regional rail proof of concept. You can I'm hovering and you can see the URL on the bottom left. This is an explanation for why the South Station expansion project is unnecessary. It is believed to be an important thing for capacity because South Station has only 13 tracks. But why would you say only for 13 tracks? Before Corona, only 20 trains entered South Station, commuter trains, I should add, not intercity. 20 commuter trains entered South Station at the busiest hour of the morning. Amtrak, I'm forgetting how much it added. I think maybe one, at most two. 1.5 trains per track per hour is ridiculously low. 2 is completely normal. 4 on busy commuter lines happens. The most is 6 that I'm aware of. That it would be, or let me amend. Most I'm aware of outside Japan, where the Chuo line makes everyone else look bad by turning 28 trains per hour on a 2-track terminal. There's an argument to be made that it is essentially urban rail, although it's a line that does have internal overtakes. No, I do not want to change the color scheme. Stop. And so I think it's really important to understand that they think that they are at capacity, but they're nowhere near capacity at South Station. And if they take that money and they instead spend it on electrification, which improves reliability, which means that if they spend the money on redoing the interlocking here a little bit, improving the switches so that instead of crawling the last kilometer or so at 10 miles an hour, 16 kilometers an hour, they could enter at a more normal speed, like 50 kilometers an hour, and save 2 minutes right here. You can save 2 minutes for all trains, commuter and intercity, right here. And instead of doing that, they try to expand South Station, essentially more and more and more tracks. For again, no good reason. It doesn't make the station nicer to use by passengers. This is a 2.2 billion or 2.25 billion dollar total waste that I hope will be removed from the wish list, of the MBTA with the transition. It's something that is it's something that Governor Baker liked because it seems like an incremental change rather than something that looks drastic like electrification. It changes the paradigm. This is keeping the same paradigm, but it costs more than changing the paradigm. Something we will see over and over. I'm going to breeze through other Boston projects. This is something that I'm going to highlight very quickly because I did complain before. Massachusetts third track, Reedville to Canton. Remember how I said that instead of trying to push electrification by the MBTA, Amtrak tries to get its trains out of the way? Yeah, that's what we're talking about. Right now, the technical trip time on Amtrak is about 36 minutes Boston to Providence, but the timetable northbound says about 46 minutes, maybe 47, because of extensive timetable padding. Now, the MBTA does this in something like an hour 10, but this is because the MBTA runs diesels. They're slow, they're unreliable, they accelerate very slowly. The stations all have, not all, but most have low platforms. So at rush hour, at the busiest rush hour station, Mansfield, passengers board so slowly they have to. It's not. So for the benefit of my European viewers, over here, when stations don't have level boarding, where this means that the platform is 550 millimeters, maybe, and the train floor is a meter, and there are 2 wide doors with 2 steps. This is not. The platform is not 550, but 200 or less. The floor of the train is not a meter, it's more like a meter 25. And the doors are narrow at the end of the train. 4 minutes is what it takes on the timetable to board the busiest train of rush hour at Mansfield. So you fix things like that. So you build high platforms, which cost the MBTA about 20 million a piece, 25 maybe with inflation. And you electrify so that the one-way trip time, instead of being an hour 10, it might be 50 minutes. And if it's 50 minutes, the difference with Amtrak is so small, Amtrak does not need new tracks. Remember, Attleboro is already a 4-track station. They can overtake there. Not only can they already do. And so this is 137.6 of complete waste. This is actually an important project. This is Attleboro is a 4-track station, as I mentioned, but the local tracks that are only used by the MBTA, not Amtrak, are unelectrified. But again, it's very cheap to change this look. Attleboro improvement, they do not need an entire redesign. They do need high platforms, but they don't need to spend 57 million. They need to spend 20, 25. That's the normal cost in Boston. I'm going to breeze through the others. I will say that the 130 million that I complained about before, it's not just 130 because it's just Reedville to Kenton. The plan is to also do a third track, and maybe it's not on this list because it's longer term, between Canton and Boston Switch. Boston Switch being here, where the tracks abruptly change their azimuths. You will see it on Google as soon as it loads. Here, this is Boston Switch. So the plan is to triple track everything from here up to Reedville, where it's already triple track, with the exception of the viaduct at Canton. I believe the estimated cost of the entire shebang is 400, maybe 500. And again, it's a complete waste. It's actually an appreciable fraction of the cost to electrify not just the Providence line, which is much cheaper than this, but the entire South Station facing system. This is why I was always fixating, awaiting something else to see that I have not seen yet. South Attleboro, Pawtucket layover. I have no idea why they're improving, Providence, and moreover why they think that the interlockings take 100 million to redo. It takes something like $200,000 to replace an interlocking if you're an American freight railway or a European railway. There aren't 500 interlockings. This is an infill station. That's not an intercity project. Also, it should not be 50. Again, improvements. I'm just breezing through things that are very small. Okay, now I said breezing through things that are small. Oh, may I voice objections to trains passing platforms at 200 kilometers an hour? Okay, so first of all, they are, so at Attleboro they are not, because there are 4 tracks. Second of all, they're already doing so. As today in the United States, the Amtrak train, the SLs do pass platforms at full speed, and this includes 150 miles an hour, 240 kilometers an hour at places. So it's already being done. And I'm not aware that there have been safety problems caused by that. Now bear in mind these are mostly low platforms, but the sway is not going to be. So if you're worried that the sway is going to lead to platform strikes, then it won't, because the sway is actually not that bad when the tracks are very well maintained. And even on the Northeast Corridor, these 240 kilometer an hour tracks with adjacent platforms, the way that it works is that the platforms are something called mini-high in much of the Boston area, including a bunch of Northeast Corridor stations. Mini-high means that based on minimal accessibility standards from 30 years ago, instead of having full-length level boarding, which in America is viewed exclusively from the lens of accessibility and not performance, they have a 1-car long high platform section with a ramp for accessibility to one car. Um, Now, this doesn't help you at all at rush hour when people need to board from all cars. It doesn't even really help speak if people boarded from their own car. Um, but the point is that there is already a high platform bit that the trains would strike if it were a safety risk in it. I wouldn't even say that the American agencies underbuild stations. I mean, they build. I wouldn't say overbuild or underbuild. They wrong build. So something like, so we're going to talk about Moynihan Station when we get to it. We're going north to south. Um, but yes, things like but there's a lot of this kind of value engineering de la schmata, where the idea is that you value engineer by making people cross um, live tracks to get to the platform on the wrong side. It's one of the things that was done for the Green Line extension in Boston as a way of saving money. Which, I mean, the money was saved, but the overall construction was still very over designed about things that are not as visible to passengers. Because, as I said, it's value engineering de la schmat. It's value engineering Charlie Baker style. So you engineer away the things that are visible and nice to the passengers, and you don't, because these people don't know anything. Again, they're generalist political appointees, the ones who make the decisions. Um, they don't know how to value engineer, and the insider managers maybe know, but they don't care because maybe it's someone else's turf. Or maybe it's their turf that is being value engineered, and then they're against it. If it's someone else's turf, then they maybe don't want to keep it, but they don't care. So anyway, let's talk about something big, which is the bridge replacement. This is the first of them, and this is the one where the cost is actually the least problematic, and we're going to get to this in a little bit. So what I mean by bridge replacement is that these are all old bridges. Now the Canton Viaduct was not on that list of bridges to be replaced, and the Canton Viaduct is the oldest of these. Now the Canton Viaduct, the Boston to Providence line in general was rather unique in America, and it was built European style, by which I mean it was built to high standards from the beginning. The line is very straight. Bear in mind, it's one of the oldest parts of the Northeast Corridor, opened 1835. The viaduct is the curviest part, and it is in American terms called a 1 degree curve. Um, there's a definition of degree, but you should think of 1 degree as radius 1,746 meters, and then 2 degrees is half that. Is how this works. This is a rather wide curve radius. Um, it has a bunch of blind arches. Essentially, at the time it was built, people were uncertain about the capabilities of steam railways, and this line was also track from the start, where most American lines were originally single track, even ones that are currently double. And so most lines were built, let's say like Boston to Worcester, which you can see as soon as this loads, is much curvier, much worse built. And even things like Newark to Philadelphia, most of it was built rather trash standards and then rebuilt to higher standards. The current Northeast Corridor into the 1860s and 70s, there isn't called Princeton Junction, one of the really busy commuter rail stations in Jersey, is that the original line meandered its way through Princeton, but by the time they could build the cutoff, they could not serve Princeton. Princeton had already been too built up. So they built somewhat away, and then they built a little connecting line between Princeton Junction and Princeton to continue serving the historic city of Princeton. It's called today the Dinky. So anyway, this is Boston to Worcester. You can already see how curvy it is, for example. Um, so anyway, a lot of these bridges are generally old and not in rather poor shape. And they're also movable, and because of a weird quirk of American law, the rule is that priorities are absolute, and the idea that you should just timetable things. You can timetable things, but it requires certain negotiations, and it's on the basis of who came first. So, for example, the Cape Cod Canal is a canal. The canal was dug after the railway, so the railway has absolute priority. If you're wondering if there's significant commercial traffic there, says no, there isn't any of these. They're mostly for pleasure boats. So here, this is not the Connecticut. This is the Thames. It's an inlet more than a big river. Um, and on the Connecticut and so on. These are all old bridges, not very reliable, and there are certain mandated bridge openings for the pleasure traffic. For example, this is Old Saybrook and Old Lyme. This is a marina. Rich people use these boats. These rich people are also NIMBYs against the construction of true high-speed rail in this region for reasons that are partly understandable. Some plans are not designed to minimize impact, but some of these reasons are just blowing, or other than just being NIMBY bullshitters. It's often the case that NIMBYs sometimes have legitimate reasons. So sometimes it's just a combo of legitimate and illegitimate reasons, and yeah, the state should avoid pissing people off for the sake of pissing people off. But if infrastructure needs to be built, at some point you need to piss people off, just not just for the sake of it. And so um, the uh, and so the Connecticut is pretty wide. How wide is it? I don't remember, but we can check. Half a kilometer. Here it's maybe a little shorter, but yeah, half a kilometer. The idea is to replace this bridge with a high bridge. So not an openable, movable bridge, but a high bridge where boats could go under. Um, so let's discuss all of the things that are wrong with this plan. The first is that even a high bridge over a half kilometer wide river does not cost $1 billion. I'm sorry, it just doesn't. Just to put things in perspective, a tunnel would be, I don't know, not full half kilometer because you'd need approaches, but something like this. Yeah, okay, 2 kilometers, and tunnels without stations don't cost half a billion per kilometer, even with the underwater premium. So the bridge, and now to the extent that tunnels are preferable to bridges, it's because they don't have to deal with approaches. But here you don't have to deal with approaches because it's a railway. Usually the issue with tunnels being sometimes superior to bridges is that the approaches are within city traffic when you're building, let's say, a road tunnel. Here, I mean, yes, there's a city, but the city is well away from the tracks. And so just if you do like this kind of limit type argument, obviously this should not be $1 billion. It should be probably I would say mid single digit, sorry, mid triple digit million. That's the first thing. The second thing, so this is just absurdly high construction costs, but I'm saying absurdly high. This is like probably 2 or 3x what it should be. Like again, this is a genuinely wide river. You can't do. I don't. I shouldn't say you can't. I do not think you can do it for 100 million. 300, yeah, probably, but 100 I don't think is doable. But wait, so this is the issue of the kind of bridge replacement stuff being a black hole with very little supervision of what the costs are for. Um, and and now we're going to do a second there. Remember I talked about how there's no coordination? There are plans to do high-speed rail here. The plan specifically, the official plan, so not my plan. My plan is to take all of I-95 east of New Haven within the state of Connecticut and use that as your high-speed rail corridor. The official plan is to start around here. The reason is that the tracks between New Haven and Old Saybrook are less curvy. You might be able to visually notice this just on Google Earth tourism here. And also the really bad river crossings are here and here. So the idea is to transition around like somewhat west of Old Saybrook, which the NIMBYs say is environmentally sensitive. For all I know, it might be true. Then go roughly parallel to I-95. They complain about impact around the marina. That's the part that's unavoidable. And then impact. I think the idea is to go south of I-95, and then there might be some noise in the center of Old Lyme. There's actually a way to. I mean, this generally should be on the north side, we think. So marina, yeah, sorry, no, but the other things are actually addressable. And again, this is a semi-official plan to actually not do full high-speed rail, but to take difficult segments and bypass them. And this is a segment that is both difficult in the sense of being very curvy and rather easy to bypass. I-95 is much straighter here. So the idea is to go something like this and then stay around I-95. New London is going to need a new bridge for this on the Thames, but I think in the long run it's already a plan anyway. Stay here and then transition back at the southern end of Rhode Island, where the line straightens significantly and becomes the fastest part of the Northeast Corridor rather than among the slowest. You can see this is like very fast. You can see how straight this is. So there's already a plan for long-term bypass. If you do a long-term bypass, you do not need to replace the bridge. This is the important thing. The main reason that the bridge is proposed to be replaced is not some nebulous thing about reliability. That's there as well, but the main reason that it's always been advocated for is that, as I mentioned, there's a mandated number of openings, and the negotiations are such that the bridge can carry, I believe, 2 trains an hour. And Amtrak prioritizes its own traffic for the most part, to the point that the commuter trains between New Haven, going from not between east of New Haven, most of them turn at Old Sabre. I don't remember how many go as far as New London, but it's very few, and the reason is that there aren't enough slots for them in which the bridge can be in the closed position, so open to railway traffic, closed to boat traffic. Now the thing is, if you move Amtrak, if you move the intercity trains to this bypass, which is again not funded or anything, but none of this is funded, it's being planned, then the bridge stays for the regional trains, and you can have just half-hourly regional service between New Haven and New London, or even going east of New London to Kingston and have like an old regional, slower alternative to the Northeast Corridor, which would be used by people going to like the little cities on the way, the Londons, the Westerlies, the Kingstons. And because of this poor planning, they're proposing to replace the bridge in situ rather than to move it to I-95. And this is something we're going to constantly see with the bridge replacements, that they're just not being planned with any kind of long-term thinking, even when the long-term thinking is proposed by the exact same agency. Like Northeast Corridor Commission is the same agency that proposed is part of the same, not the agency, but the same process that created Northeast Corridor Future, the one that recommended this bypass. So, so they're not even talking to themselves. Now, I'm not going to talk about a $60 million interlocking or $13 million interlocking. Enfield Station, I'm just going to point out. It's a new station that Connecticut is building, not on the Northeast Corridor, but on the Springfield branch, so New Haven to Springfield. New Haven, Hartford, Springfield, for people who don't know. It's an intermediate station that's supposed to be opened here for $50 million. This is because Connecticut does not know how to do project management. It's in Boston, the same thing would cost half as much. In Philadelphia, less than in Boston. Not talking about the Hartford line, which is New Haven to Hartford to Springfield. I don't know why they're spending $400 million in moving Hartford. Another bridge replacement, which I'm not going to comment on, except look, expensive bridge replacement. West Hartford, $60 million, again, should be about 15. Station. Okay, this is this really silly thing. It's a $3 million, not improvement of the Fairmount line, but a study of the Fairmount line. For the record, if you're involved in this in an official capacity and you think it's going to be $3 million to do a study, please outsource it to us at the Transit Cost Project. We'll do you the same study. We will be equally rigorous to whatever private consultancy you hire, and we're not going to charge you $3.3 million. Let's say, I'm not going to tell how much we're going to charge because I need to project manage this with Eric, but I'm guessing below to mid 6 figures. Like this is like they're severely overpaying for professional services. And again, another study, regional rail plan, which is again just a study. I mean, essentially we've done this for free at Transit Matters, right? Just use that. TF Green station expansion for $240 million. I have no idea why they need that. It's a severely underused station. And And finally, Providence to Boston traction power upgrades. 70 kilometers, and they think that upgrading the traction power is going to be 450 million. Now, let me explain something. Costs of so in the same way that you can do what I did and do regional proof of concept, let's do regional rail electrification transit matters. There are links to how much it would cost. 70 kilometers, double track, including wires and transformers, should be, with present day inflation, about 200. The wires are already there. Now they do need to expand. Now, I want to make it clear, it's not $450 million that's entirely set on fire. A few millions of this are actually good. The rest is being set on fire. Like 95%, 97% of this is set on fire. They do need to increase the capacity of the substations because Amtrak, recall, only electrified its own lines because the MBTA in the 1990s was interested in electrification. However, Amtrak did build enough space when it built the substation, which is called Sharon Substation, for future MBTA electrification. So Amtrak was already forward thinking about this in the 1990s. The MBTA has just not been interested. And so you'd need to spend extra money on transformers, yes, but transformers are not that expensive. I want to say high single digit, maybe teens, millions. I doubt 20s. I really doubt 20s. For a substation that, remember, already exists, needs to be expanded for more traction power, but this can be entirely within right of way, within land that's already owned by Amtrak for the purposes of expanding the substation. But they're still thinking that it's going to be 450 million. Now, bear in mind, they might talk about other things here that about in the scope, for example, to buy new electric trains from Boston to Providence. Now, how much do you need? Again, we have sample timetables. It's 4 trains an hour, rush hour between Boston and Providence. This is 7 sets, maybe 8 sets. Another 4 an hour, rush hour, Boston to Canton. Not to Canton, to Stoughton via Canton, which is, I think, 5, 6, I think 5 sets an hour, so 13. So 13 sets. A train set, these are long train sets, so 8 cars minimum, 200 meters, maybe even a bit more. So these sets would be about 20 million. So it's possible that they're including the cost of rolling stock, in which case this is going to make me groan, but I'm not going to say that they're setting 97% of the money on fire, but they're not saying the rolling stock is included. So it's possible that they're just underbilling this line, I'm not sure. Station. I'm going to talk about New England additional stuff about drainage because these are always very cheap and I don't want to I don't want to spend too much time on $2 million at a time, and specifically, I'm not going to spend a lot of time studying $2 million at a time unless it's part of something broader. Okay, now on the New Haven line, let's scroll down and get to. I'm not going to talk about the signal replacement. The rolled-out signals should be the only legal signaling system in the United States for passenger railways. It needs to be European Train Control System Level 2. It's actually really easy to install because it is a new build rather than an overlay, which means you install the infrastructure for it. You install the transponders in the train and the in-cab screens on the trains that talk to the signal system, and then you just rip up and then you just disconnect everything else. It's already been done in a bunch of places. Not that many, because the larger countries of Europe have decided that they like their own national signal systems. They are worried that ETCS is too open a standard and they will not be able to steer state money toward favored contractors this way. France and Germany deserve the worst demerits about this. The smaller countries maybe don't have big concerns at that scale that they're trying to protect. And so they're the ones that are pushing this. I think it's Switzerland, the Netherlands, something that Denmark keeps being on and off with. Israel. part of its electrification project is nationwide ETCS level 2. Um, the biggest and busiest rail network in the world, that of China, does not do ETCS. It essentially took ETCS, changed the E for European to C for Chinese, did little modifications that are essentially just cutting it slightly differently, but essentially it's just ETCS except made by Chinese companies rather than European ones. This is the global standard. This should have been when the United States passed a federal mandate for automatic train protection, or in American terms, positive train control. Yeah, I don't think ETCS. Yeah, I don't think the Netherlands has ETCS now. I think the Netherlands is planning on ETCS. It's a long project. The resignaling projects take longer than people expect in the US and in Europe. And the big countries have just canceled. I'm forgetting what NL did, but I know that the I know that parts of it do. I just my understanding is that smaller countries are actually planning on ETCSing their entire systems. Yeah, sure, you can have right. If you have an older train that speaks ATB, then you run it with ATB. But the newer trains speak ETCS. And in the United States, the issue is the United States does not have KVB. The United States does not have PZB, let alone LZB. The United States does not have AFSA. The United States does not have any of these actually high, uh, any of these actually high performance legacy 1960s, 70s signal systems that we have here. The legacy American signaling is garbage from the 1930s. Garbage from the 1930s with weird things like they cannot properly install it, or they have not figured out how to properly install it at multi-track rail terminals, and therefore they shut down the train protection at rail terminals, and they keep having overrun, and the trains keep overrunning the bumper tracks, and they kill people. And so, as a kind of safety theater, they're limiting them to 15 miles an hour, which is still catastrophic overrun speed. And instead of actually having consistent automatic train protection, it's fucking awful. And this is even with relatively recent things. Much of, I think maybe the entire Northeast Corridor plus the MBTA, even not Northeast Corridor, uses a system called Access, which is essentially an Americanization and Alstom vendor lock version of ETCS level 1, but it's still an overlay and it's not quite a signal system. It's just the train protection system. It overlays on 1930s bullshit with kind of hilarious limitations in its capabilities. So, so whenever you see signal spending, what you should just mentally take it off the ledger and compare with how much it would cost at, let's say, Swiss cost or Dutch cost or something like that, or Israeli cost, to have ETCS as the only legal passenger rail signal system. Yard for $1 billion. I'm just gonna say lol and move on. What are they talking about? Store and maintain the rail fleet. It does not cost $1 billion to do that, even at NPV. New facilities. Note they're not actually telling us what there is going to come out of this. They're just saying new facilities to improve efficiency and allow for growth. They're not going to say it's going to cut operating costs by X. They're not going to say it's going to cut maintenance costs by Y. They're not going to say it's going to allow Z extra trains. No, it's just efficiency. No transparency. It's the standard American, and to be fair, rest of English-speaking world way. Tell the public as little as possible so that they have as little surface area as possible to criticize you. And then when someone tries to benchmark the bigger cost, people say, well, they don't know the breakdowns. No shit, you didn't tell us. Often you don't even know yourself. Gonna breeze through this, breeze through the extra track, interim repairs, I don't know. Oh, now we're getting into a new bridge. Okay. Remember how I said that a while back we were talking about how the Connecticut River Bridge is $1 billion and it should be less than that, but not an order of magnitude less. Now let's go into this bridge called Devon. Now there are 4 significant movable bridges um, between I forget whether New York or the New York Connecticut state line and New Haven. North to south, they're called Devon. It is this one. Devon is the bridge on the river on the Housatonic, I believe, between which is the boundary river between Fairfield County and New Haven County. This is half the length, sorry, half the width of the Connecticut. Now, the approaches are busier, but it's not like there's a city here that the approaches are going to erase. You can stage here. Yes, you're going to need to knock down this building. It is not worth that much. Or here it's a bunch of parking. Here it's empty land. Same thing here. Same thing here. For some reason, this bridge is said to be $2 billion, and I'm puzzled as to why. They're not explaining why. They're just saying things like it is a functionally obsolete bridge and it's experienced deterioration. And they're talking about designing and constructing a replacement bridge. Again, $2 billion for crossing a river a quarter kilometer in width, and nobody's asking questions. The correct solution until the question is going to be answered and the cost brought down to a fraction, potentially an order of magnitude less than current costs, is no build. As I said, 4 bridges. This is not actually one of them. So it goes Devon, then then here it's called Saga. It's on the, I think it's called Saga Tap or something like that. And this is called Walk Bridge or Norwalk, and this is called where is it here? Called Cobb Bridge. So Devon is just a very simple case, no build. I have no idea what this $400 million is doing. Upgrade a 3-mile stretch of track in Bridgeport to a state of good repair for $400 million. This is insane. And they're saying that it's part of the replacement of the bridge, so add that to this ledger. Yeah. And again, same thing here. Now, Saga Bridge, as I said, it's this one. I believe it's another $1 billion to replace. Yeah, no, actually, no, it's only 400. I guess it's because it's the narrowest one, but that starts raising questions. Okay, I mean, this is 110 meters. Why is it, if this is 400, why when it's twice as long and why Devon, which is twice as wide and in an area that's actually easier to stage replacement in than here, why is that not 800 by 2 billion? Bear in mind, 400 here is also too high, but it just raises more and more questions. And by the way, this is not actually necessary for high-speed rail, but they are playing a challenge run in which you're not allowed to make significant right-of-way deviations between New York and New Haven. The actual way that you'll be doing this around here, it needs to be I-95, so no need to care about Saga or Walk. Transition back around Stanford. And I guess this is part of, it's part of Walk, replacement of 4 minor bridges. Like all of these things are things that they keep saying are really important, and then the costs are just so much more. So now the Walk Bridge replacement is another billion. This is 400 million. This is a billion. So 400 million versus a billion. This is not that wide. The river here, it's like what? Also 100 meters. Why is this $1 billion? That's just more and more questions. And they're not answering. They're not itemizing. They're not explaining. They're just expecting, and then they're just expecting when they say the bridge is obsolete or they need it for good repair, and they're essentially threatening to keep deferring maintenance, even though they're spending far more on maintenance per, let's say, track kilometer than comparable European railways. They demand essentially $1 billion as kind of a hostage. It's kind of a hostage exchange. Again, no build, no build, no build. Um, Now Coscob is another billion, 0.2 with the interim. Now Coscob is actually something that does need to be replaced, and this is the example they talked about before, where the lack of long-term planning means that they're going to do a project that is both too expensive and not good enough. So what do I mean? Coscob, as you may be able to see here, has two short, sharp curves. This is much sharper than this one. Now, this is a genuinely bad bridge. I've ridden on it many times, and it is very noticeable because I sometimes plug in my laptop to work on the train, and the bridge is unpowered. The trains coast on the bridge, and this means that suddenly the power on the train goes off for a fraction of a minute while it goes over the bridge. Um, this is again pure pleasure boat traffic for people here. Um, and As it happens, this is not actually a bad bridge to replace, just because of the right-of-way geometry here is just not very good. Now, the correct right-of-way geometry, I'm not going to show you the rest of the Northeast Corridor crayon that I've drawn because I did show it to you guys, I think, last year. This does not look too divergent, but it does diverge from the corridor a little bit, and this is deliberate. Essentially, you convert two short, sharp curves into one long, wide curve. And when you do that, first of all, you do need to do some takings, because I think maybe a few houses here, maybe a few here. We're talking maybe 10, maybe a bit more, maybe a bit less. Now, Greenwich, Connecticut is very wealthy. Pete Campbell from Mad Men is said to move, his big move to the suburbs is to Coscob. He's not the richest, but he is pretty rich. It's when he already has a stake in the firm. And so he commutes from here. So again, very wealthy people. And so the cost of a house is $1 million at least. But $1 million, 2 million times 10, that's on the billion, 0.2. Moreover, if this were a single wide curve rather than two short sharp curves, then there would be much more separation between the bridge and the existing bridge. And this means that it would be much easier to stage because you just build this section, and only then when it's done do you do the connections here and here. So it's actually both, ignoring the fact that on top of everything, somehow they're spending 1.2 billion on crossing 200 meters of water. But even moving that aside, it's genuinely easier to build at larger separation. It's actually one of the reasons they're building the Gateway Tunnel, as we will see, not quite just south of the existing tunnels, but the existing North River tunnels, but well to their south. More signal replacement. Just put. I have no idea why they're spending $300 million on upgrading. Platform sections are failing due to their age. Ensure ADA compliance. The station, I believe, is already accessible. If it isn't, it's not $300 million to change it. It's 10. The construction of a pedestrian bridge. Yes, $300 million, as well as a new parking garage. How about no more public funds for parking ever? There's already too much parking. They should replace parking with transit-oriented development. Again, they're talking about increased canopy, and like all of these things are complete bullshit. It's not 300 million, or you're just spending 300 million almost on a parking garage, because that's disgusting. Especially it's disgusting to call it a rail program. It's not. Darien, replace station platforms. Note that it costs more to replace a station that's already high platform, 45 million, than to build a new one in Boston, which would be 25. And they're still not going to demand any transit-oriented development in Darien. Platform replacement. Replace station platforms and elevators. It's 300 million. Yeah, all of this is just something that I'm going to ascribe to laziness. That is to say, if other people's money is available, you won't spend a lot of time trying to shop around. It's the equivalent of how Um, if I'm thirsty, okay, thirsty, I want water. I live in Berlin where the water is very hard in the tap, and therefore I get stomach cramps if I drink too much of it. So what does this mean? It means that I live off of bottled water. Now, if I'm trying to economize, generally might as well, then I will get where will I get the bottles? I will get them at the supermarket where the cost of this liter and a half bottle is 25 cents. I pay 50. I pay 50 and I get 25 back when I do a bottle return. Now, this, however, is not from a supermarket. It's not a brand that is sold at the big supermarkets. This is a brand that is sold at, it's a Turkish brand, you might be able to tell. Edifli. It's sold at small grocery stores that charge you much more. So instead of paying 50 and then I get 25 cents back, I pay 250 and I get 25 cents back. Um, why do I do this? Because maybe I'm thirsty and I'm in a hurry and the supermarket is not that close to my apartment and the small grocery store is. Now, this is me knowing that I'm wasting €2, but I'm thirsty now and I maybe don't want to take the 20-minute detour through the supermarket and maybe I value my time at more than €6 an hour. Um, and so it's very easy to just buy bottled water for net €2.25 and not 25. Why do I not refill from the tap? Because the tap water in Berlin is very hard and therefore gives me stomach cramps. There are places where it doesn't, and there I drink much more tap water, like Paris, for example. Uh, but here I actually get cramps. So even when I was making a lot less money than I do now, I got bottled water, but made sure to get it from like Lidl or Aldi or Kaufland to make sure that I'm paying 25 cents a bottle, not to not multiple euros. And so it's very easy to turn a 25-cent purchase into a 25-cent purchase if you don't care about cost. Now, maybe I do care about cost because, something that I save every time I buy groceries. Um, but what if it's too much pain to walk the 20 minutes extra? What if someone else is paying? Someone who I have an adversarial relationship with and try to maximize how much money I'm taking from them out of a sense of achievement that I brought home the bacon, so to speak, which is exactly how these state level agencies operate. They think in terms of how to maximize federal funding. And the federal government is not competent enough to tell them, fuck you. Um, the filter's not doing us. I don't know. Um, in Paris, filter like what? Like in Paris, mostly I was buying. I was buying bottled water at 20 cents a bottle, not 25. Only when the Brita filter was um gone and they didn't feel like going to replace it. So maybe for a couple of days, I would get bottled water before getting um a new filter, which I don't think was available at because um so at any rate, the point is that it's if you're relying on other people's money and if there's no sunshine, and this is America, there's no sunshine. If you want good sunshine on government, you go to Italy, which is not maybe stereotyped as a place with a lot of transparency, but when it comes to government procurement, specifically because their big corruption scandals in the 1980s and 90s were about subway construction, um, like big infrastructure procurement there is actually extremely transparent. Um, in the same way that in my knowledge, the sort of racism that was very common in the United States in the 1950s and 60s is exactly the stuff that the civil rights legislation defended against, and therefore is something that is actually kind of a model for other places to learn from. I mean, not everything in America. Like, I'm not saying America is less racist than Western Europe. It's absolutely it's not. Um, there are things where it is, things where there are places where it's worse, places where it's better. But there are certain aspects that are worth learning from, in the same way that Italy overall still has big problems with tax evasion, for example, but specifically stuff about transparency in public procurement, it's very good at. And because there's no transparency and these agencies live to maximize spending, not to maximize benefits, this is how this turns into a, from a good bridge, it would be, I don't even, for like the entire curve should be about a kilometer. And elevated, even with the water making it a little harder, this is like $100 million project. And this $100 million project is turning into an entire $1.2 billion project. Um, and so let's keep going. Um, just more things that are just look. Okay, look here. This is $400 million between CP223 and CP229. I believe they're named after miles, so this is 6 miles. Implement track improvements, improve track geometry for 90 miles an hour speed, and replace very small bridges. Bear in mind, this is something that maybe not the bridge replacement, but certainly changing the track geometry within right of way, something that can be done in a couple nights with a track laying machine, something that is not used in the United States. They do inspections with machines, and then they figure out what the defective sleepers are, and then they only replace the defective sleepers. So you can have two adjacent sleepers on the same railway, on the same rail track in the United States with very different maintenance histories, which then complicates maintenance in the future. And then when you suggest that maybe they replace everything at once, they stare at you as if you suggested that they throw food. Um, like notions like doing consistent maintenance of a train set or of a section of railway, that's just not how Americans work. And you can see it in the result. You can see it in the maintenance costs, not just the construction costs. Okay, I'm going to try to breeze through these because I don't think there's anything here that's especially big. Now, New York City Metro. This is another bridge replacement. This is with the usual claims about obsolescence. This is the Pelham Bay Bridge. Same thing where you have where you have two short, sharp curves instead of one big one. But bear in mind that here it's the longest bridge on the list so far. Just because of I mean, maybe not this section, but if you don't count the approach, it's actually pretty long. And now the staging is going to be a little bit sketch, and the reason is that you do have space here, but this is like a very dense city that you need to worry about. And I believe that this might actually be protected wetlands. So so this can be replaced, and it's something that a little bit like Hallscob should probably be replaced on a different curve. But it's something that is genuinely more difficult, and yet somehow this more difficult thing is 700 million, and the easier things in Connecticut are 1 billion to 2 billion. And now we're getting into the real meat. Penn Station access, almost $3 billion. What is Penn Station access? The tracks already exist and carry Amtrak between New Rochelle and Penn Station via this line, which is called the Hellgate line. This area is called Hellgate Bridge. Reason being that this area used to be so rocky until the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers dynamited a lot of these rocks, and so a lot of boats hit these rocks and sank in the 19th century. So the area was called Hellgate. Therefore, it's called Hellgate Bridge. Therefore, this line is called Hellgate Line. This is a project that was a priority for Governor Andrew Cuomo, for which, because it would take Metro North into Penn Station, previously going from the east, an Amtrak or mostly an LIRR turf, was subjected to fierce opposition by the LIRR and Long Island politicians, opposition that vanished when Cuomo fired the LIRR CEO, Helena Williams, and therefore all of these objections suddenly were silenced. And as it happened, Cuomo happened to have been right there. Nearly every decision Cuomo has taken has been wrong, but from time to time he blunders into being correct. which is very newsworthy. It's a little bit like a news item. Man bites dog, right? When a dog bites a man, it's not news. When a man bites a dog, it is. When Cuomo kills people, it's not news. When Cuomo undertakes the right decision, it is. In this case, Cuomo undertook the right decision. Unfortunately, the rest of the project is $3 billion for tracks that already exist. It's about 30 kilometers. The main meat of it is to build 4 infill stations, which are Co-op City. You know something? Instead of trying to memorize the locations, I have them on some kind of regional rail crayon. I have the correct locations for them, which are Co-op City, Mars Park, Parkchester, and Hunts Point. Pelham Parkway and Astoria. Sorry, Pelham Parkway is my pure crayon. I don't think it's been proposed by other people. Astoria has actually been studied and rejected. I believe it was rejected because for 2 reasons, of which one is legit and one is not. The legit reason is that this is a rather steep grade. The line is elevated over the buildings, and so building platforms here would be quite involved. Now you can stage it. You can stage it in the parking lot, but you do need to lose buildings in Astoria. These are not very big buildings, but they are residential. Probably they look like townhouses to me. Residential townhouses in New York City in a neighborhood that is actually pretty desirable. So this is money. I don't think it's hundreds of millions of dollars of money, but it is money. The reason that is not legitimate is that they modeled how much ridership. So you don't just say costs are high, right? You don't just say costs are high and therefore you shouldn't build. Do you know what costs a lot of money? The TGV. France has spent, I want to say, 30 billion or so euros to date on the TGV. Okay, but what has it gotten out of it? Well, the answer is Europe's highest productivity intercity railway network. At long distances, I should say. At shorter and medium distances, nobody has anything on Switzerland. So you compare the cost with the benefits. So they're claiming high costs, legit. They, however, also claim very low benefits. Why? Because they're used to commuter rail norms. To in now where I live, what is a commuter rail? Commuter rail is essentially the subway. They're like essentially normal urban rail, but on mainline tracks that go into the suburbs. The S-Bahn in Berlin is mostly urban rail. It goes into the suburbs. Yes, nearly all ridership is within the city. Yes, it's more outer city than the U-Bahn because it uses historic commuter lines, but it's essentially urban rail using commuter lines. Using historic legacy main lines. The fares are the same as on the U-Bahn, and on the buses and the trams. In America, they don't roll this way. In America, commuter rail charges a large premium. I see this every time I fly into New York because because JFK takes me to Jamaica from the air train, which you can maybe my head is hovering. You can see the air train here. From the air train, it takes me to Jamaica Station, one of the most important in Queens, where I can take the subway on the E train, which goes here. It's not currently. I don't. They're not depicting it in black, or the LIRR. The LIRR charges, I want to say, $7 or $8. The subway charges subway fare, which is $2.75. In a sense, in essence, this is apartheid transit. One train for the rich, mostly white suburbanites. The workers are also almost entirely white. One train for the city, but I shouldn't say poor, but one train that is the only one that the poor people can afford to take, but also city middle class. Very racially diverse ridership. New York City is only 1/3 white. The workforce is extremely diverse. I believe I believe that the train drivers on the subway in New York are also about only 1/3 white. They also earn much lower wages than do the commuter rail drivers. High wages by European standards. They earn 85K a year, but the commuter train drivers earn 120. And so, because of this apartheid system, which is not being reformed, now in Boston has made some moves to that effect. I think Philadelphia either is or will soon. Lots of technically informed activism there. in Philadelphia, it's very exciting, and they might actually turn their existing system into something that passes SBAN standards. Boston's unfortunately not quite there, but again, very strong technically literate activism by Transit Matters, and the and this specifically includes the fare reductions, which to some extent are being done in Boston already for equity. Equity is very big in like the kind of civic activism sphere there. And so, for example, the commuter trains that are exclusively in city mostly charge similar fares to the subway within the city. Now, if this happened and if the frequency were also high, which in Boston it isn't, would I say that the S1 is better intended than the U-Bahn? No. In Berlin, no. Okay, so first of all, working elevators is kind of hard to say because I'm trying to remember when I've used an elevator on an S-Bahn. I know I have, but it's very uncommon. Whereas I use the elevator on the U-Bahn much more, and I don't find them deficient. I don't find the elevators in Berlin bad. I don't find the elevators in Berlin to be smelly. They have very high uptime. From time to time, they don't work, but it's very rare in my experience. Um, the ride quality, I would say, is the same. Now, yeah, the fact that it's elevated means that you don't get motion sick because you can see where you're going, and it's much nicer. But other than that, it doesn't matter. I don't think. And trains being cleaner, I mean, I've seen I've seen schmutz either way. This is Berlin we're talking about. I have no idea how clean it is, how clean the public transport is in Poland. Oh, hi, hi, Tyrannosaur Gaming. Yeah, so I was going on a tangent talking about how about Berlin railway standards. Oh, hi, Butito. Okay, sorry. So now I don't need to explain everything to you because I know that you've participated enough that I don't need to define an S-Bahn for you. Very good. Um, so anyway, on the Northeast, so going back to the Northeast corridor issues, the New York sticks with the apartheid transit situation where commuter rail charges higher fares and has mostly peak uh, service, very little off-peak. Based on that analysis, they assumed Astoria would have very low ridership. Now, Astoria is a middle-class neighborhood. Astoria residents can afford higher fares, but again, in the same way that I don't purposely buy this for 250, not 225, when I could buy buying for 25 cents, not when I go to the supermarket. Um, they're not going to randomly splurge. They're on the subway. The subway is literally right there, and the subway gets into much more of Midtown. It makes many more stops, and it's of course much more frequent. So the assumption was that very few people from here would switch, whereas Co-op City is so far away that the alternative is a much longer subway ride, so people there would switch. Um, so essentially, this is where the Astoria station was deleted, and in turn, this is a program consisting of 4 stations. Again, these are to show them more clearly on my crayon. Hunts Point, Parkchester, Morris Park, Skip, this isn't purely my crayon, and Co-op City. And some additional for tracking to support them, because now instead of being an exclusive track for the use of intercity trains, this is intercity trains and slower commuter trains. This somehow turned into $2.9 billion. I, again, don't quite understand why. It's not that each station is 700. I think each station is about 150 or 200. Um, is it insanely expensive? Yes. Is most of the cost? No, and I don't know why. Um, I'm guessing it's just because it was a Cuomo project. Everyone hung all of their hopes on it. And so if Cuomo was funding it, the greatest clout in the state is to get a royal governor like Cuomo, royal in the sense of he inherited his role and he is about his, and both his competence and his behavior standards are what one would expect of a king. And I don't mean the highly sanitized kings of modern, constitutional European monarchies. I mean Joffrey Baratheon. It's probably the most accessible literary uh, analog of Andrew Cuomo. And so the so the upshot is that probably just a lot of this, like, basic laziness of spending 2.25 on water instead of 25 cents. It's so easy when you're getting clout from saying, "Ooh, Cuomo funded my 2.25." In that case, why even spend 2.25? I can get an artisanal brand, maybe not at a random grocery store, but I can probably go to some high-end organic something something and get artisanal water for more. In New York, they never will sell you a bottle like this for 25 cents. Like what I paid at the with a markup at the Späti here, it's I think normal New York supermarket price, and you can get a brand like Fiji or something where this would cost €5. It's very easy to waste money if you don't care. And when Cuomo makes it his own priority, what he's saying is you shouldn't care. This is a big problem with politicization on top of early commitment. So this is Penn Station access, East River Tunnel rehabilitation. I don't know why they think it should be 1.3 billion, but the idea is that they need to be rehabilitated after having been damaged by saltwater from Sandy. It clearly is money that is required. I don't know if 1.3 is correct for this, but I don't know how to benchmark this. It's mostly I mistrust them, but I also don't have an alternative number. It's probably the best way to them. Harold is 1.4. It was supposed to be $250 million. It's at this point 1.4 billion. Harold, in case people don't know, it's a project to essentially do a rail and rail grade separation so that, and again, I'm going to boot Crayon because the Crayon kind of assumes Harold. Um, so I have a little bit of an exaggeration, but not even actually. So it's actually a really good Crayon for this. So the red line exists. The red line is the existing North River Tunnel, um, connected with tunnels that exist under the East River. Orange, these tunnels exist across the East River. This line exists and it's called the Empire Connection. This connection doesn't exist, or rather, it exists but to a different part of Penn Station. Like this is a single track connection that I think ends up around here, not here. So this bit is Crayon, but the rest of the orange exists. Green, this is a real part of the four-track Park Avenue tunnel for Metro North. This is not actually where this is something I might want to add it. This is supposed to be Gateway, but Gateway is not, as I mentioned, it's not actually parallel to the North River Tunnels. Gateway is supposed to, I think, be on this side of the reservoir. It's going to be something like this because they have some kind of weird redundancy argument to keep it as far away from the North River tunnels as possible. Um, and I highlight all of this because the point is that you have this path, and then this path, because this is where Amtrak goes, this path should go to the Hellgate line, um, or to the Port Washington branch, but I think this is a different uh, interlocking we're talking about. It's specifically this versus this, Hellgate versus LIR. And essentially, the part where this is a block south of this one, it's not like it's a four-track line and it's interspersed like local and press. No, this is two tracks, one eastbound, one westbound under 32nd Street. These are two, one eastbound, one westbound under 33rd Street. And why can Sunny still be a problem after 10 years? They could have taken track out only during weekends because they actually need all for rush hour service. During Corona, they could have done this, but the United States was so paralyzed by inaction during Corona that Corona somehow made infrastructure projects more delayed in the United States, whereas here it made them less delayed because they could just shut service more easily. For example, U5, I think would have been delayed slightly if Corona hadn't happened because they just figured that they can just shut down U55 and do the connection out of service. Few people rode U55 even when it did exist, even before Corona. By the way, how can this be a problem after 10 years? Oh, you child of summer. By child of summer, I mean child of Europe. No. They specifically said that the deadline for the North River tunnels was 2030 something, designed around the precise expected opening date of Gateway, which has since slipped. So this is about 1.3, and this is another 1.3. But again, Harold is just taking. So right now, to do this, trains don't need to cross opposed traffic at grade, I believe, but I think they need to cross same direction traffic at grade. So maybe red needs to cross orange. Again, same traffic, same direction. So eastbound crossing eastbound, not eastbound crossing westbound at grade. And this is essentially a rail and rail grade separation that is taking about 10 times more than it should at this point. Let's skip through flood mitigation, which I can't actually tell you if it's good or bad. And now Gateway. Gateway is the main prize. Gateway, including projects that are not going to be on the next 5-year spending plan but are longer term, is $37 billion in Paris, a city with many problems, cost overruns, politicization, utility conflicts, procurement norms that are getting worse with every few years. They're getting worse every few years as they try to privatize the state on the British model. Slightly more than $37 billion, 37 billion euros, are building 200 kilometers of suburban metro, all automated. 160 out of the 200 kilometers are underground. $37 billion in the United States don't build this section, which is called Alt G, and which should be considered again, but isn't. No, that builds from here to here. At grade, bridge, tunnel. Same cost as 200 kilometers in Paris. So 11 billion is Penn Station expansion. This is where they're getting this idea that they're going to take this entire block south of Penn Station. It's called Block 780. This one. They're going to condemn it in order to build extra tracks at Penn Station. I believe 7 extra tracks. Penn Station does not need new tracks. Penn Station has 21. Remember what I said before about 1.5 trains per hour per track being very lazy? Now, Penn Station is way more than 1.5. You net out Amtrak, Penn Station has something like 19-ish usable tracks. Penn has 21, but again, you net out, let's say, 2 for Amtrak. 21 pre-corona New Jersey Transit trains per hour at the rush. 37 LIR, so 58 way 19-ish, so about 3. Now, 3 trains per hour per track is not lazy, but it's something that is not that exciting. They do 4 in many places in London. So usually it's 16 trains per hour into a 4-track terminal. They do that in Paris at the RERE with capacity for 18, but they're already extending it west, so they're through running before they're going to need more than 16. In Barcelona, it's 24 trains per hour on the FGC system, which I believe has 3 branches. Let me check this. I don't want to lie on stream. It's called Rodalias instead of Cercanías because something Catalan something. So let me see if I can actually figure out from the map which one is FGC. It's this one. Yeah, it's the one with the S's. So there is this branch. This is a branch. This is a branch. But most of the system is these 2 main branches with some short turns. Short turns here, short turn here. 24 trains per hour, I believe, terminate on 4 tracks at Catalunya. And I believe they're doing upgrades to make that 32. They think that they need to spend 11 billion on more tracks when their current traffic is not 6 or 8 per track, but 3 per track, where they can moreover trivially lessen the burden through running. Where even with Gateway, it's going to be more than 3 per track. It's going to be 4, 4.5 per track, which requires some schedule discipline, but it's possible. And again, they can lessen that through running, which they're saying they're looking at, but they're looking for excuses to say that it's not possible unless you give them another $100 billion. $11 billion that, let me see if I can find this. This is the meme. It's a scene from The Dark Knight where the Joker, where the Joker takes all of the money that he got from the Gotham City mob for his services in trying to kill Batman. And he has this line about how he likes explosives, gunpowder, and fuel, and these are all cheap, so he doesn't need money, and he just sets the money on fire. This is $11 billion that is being ceremonially burned. $11 billion that I don't know whether it belongs to like any person watching this on stream right now. I mean, Prague, if you're watching it, it's partly your money, but but certainly the Europeans aren't. But you can point and laugh. I guess Adultito, you live in LA, it's also federally funded, so yeah, just money being wasted. For some reason, they still need, after so much stuff they did on the LA course, they still want another 700 million for it. Reconstruction, because for all the work they've done with the Moynihan Station, another 7 billion for reconstruction. They spent, I think, 1.6 billion on turning this into a train station, which looks very nice in pictures, but there's nowhere to sit. When I was there, the gender neutral bathrooms, which do exist, I will give credit, were closed, and I was just told that all of the bathrooms are as of recently closed. So they spend so much money on a station that looks nice in pictures, but is extremely hostile when you're actually there as a passenger, and track level is still trash. And now they want $7 billion for more reconstruction. What do they want? Major reconstruction, improve. You know how they're not unify the Penn Station with, like, they're not actually saying what this will look like. They're not telling me anything about wayfinding. They're not telling me anything about, can I wait on the platform, or do I still need to gaze at the departure board and only 10 minutes before the train will the track number be announced, sending everyone into a shuffle? They're not saying that. Yeah, it's just $7 billion that's about to be set on fire. Plus 400 on an individual concourse. To be clear, when I say concourse, I mean small part of the station. So let me see if I can find this. Yeah, Jason Gibbs' site is very good for this. So when I say concourse, I don't mean level. I mean this is the central concourse. It's one corridor, and they think it's going to be that much to upgrade. Now we're getting into actually good stuff. Hudson Tunnel Project. Gateway is many things. The Hudson Tunnel Project is the green line that I'm not depicting in the correct location between Penn Station and the portal. Very good project. The most important public transport project in the United States right now. Only problem is it should not be $16 billion. It should be probably about 3. Maybe 2. Maybe 3 is with the connection to Grand Central, which is not included. You see, this project is, it's about 5 kilometers of tunnel. I think they say it's longer, but I mean, I can count, and the stuff, and the part where it's not direct doesn't matter at that scale. It's about 5 kilometers. 5 kilometers of tunnel. No stations because it hooks into existing tracks at Penn Station, and the expansion of Penn Station, setting aside it's not necessary, the expansion is a separate line item. Now I believe this also includes about $1.5 billion for refurbishment of these tunnels. So net that out, please. And still, when you net that out, it's 5 kilometers of tunnel. We know how much 5 kilometers of tunnel costs because we know the costs of tunneling even for regional rail projects around the world. And we can even look at the tunneling costs within New York City. Second Avenue subway was, in today's money, 6 billion. In today's money, it was 6 billion, of which stations in which the stations were, if you prorate the project management, the stations were 3/4. So 6 divided by 4 billion and a half for tunnel and stations. Sorry, not tunnels and stations. Netting out the stations, tunnel and systems. Tunnel is we're also netting off the launch box, which is part of the 96th Street station. However, the launch box here would be much easier because this is a ridge, so you just launch horizontally or somewhat slant. You don't need to do a dig for the launch. And the so you launch this is 2.7 kilometers, so this should be about twice that. So 3 billion. And yeah, there's going to be somewhat of an underwater premium, but it's only a third of the line. And the underwater premium is not that massive. So yeah, 3 billion if you're assuming the cost of New York City on a project that was nicknamed by someone who is not me, the most expensive mile of subway tunnel on Earth. That should be it. You benchmark to that, and it's 3, and they're saying it's, again, in theory 16, but not of things that are bundled that should not be bundled with, probably 13. I mean, again, good project, but 16 billion for 200,000 passenger trips, that's not good enough. Now comes Portal Bridge. Portal Bridge, you see, is a two-track bridge. It's one of these bridge replacements that are being made to cost much more. This is, again, not a difficult one. No, not a wide one. The issue is that there are wetlands on both sides, so this constrains the approaches. And yet, Portal North, the issue is it's a two-track bridge. It's being replaced. There's something called Portal North, which is 2 tracks, and Portal South, which is another 2 tracks. I never remember which is the one that's already happening and which is the one that's being proposed because they didn't do it as one project. Together, this and this, $4.5 billion for something that is, just as a reminder, about 300 meters, slightly more than half the length of the width of the Connecticut. The Connecticut, with the usual CDOT bullshit, is 1 billion. This, yeah, it's 4-track and not 2. But on barely half the span, 4.5. So this is just, again, something that's necessary to 4-track the line, but they just let the cost explode, I guess, because they said, oh, it's necessary. And essentially, it means that this kind of 4-tracking project, this needs to be tacked onto this cost. So now it's 16. Again, net of this was maybe like 13, and now it's 17.5. This is another bullshit, $1.6 billion, something called Secaucus Loop Track. Now, again, I'm going to show it on my crayon, and just mentally prepare yourself for the fact that none of these tunnels exist today, except this, the purple one is about to open as East Side Access on this side. This is crayon. Red and orange here exist. Red here exists. Orange here exists, but not quite, and these exist only as far as Grand Central, not farther south. So, the issue is that Gateway gets these trains into Penn Station. Now I'm proposing like a completely separate tunnel for that, but that's like the 6th, what I call line 6 here. You can zoom in and see the R numbers that are supposed to be somewhat chronological. So this is 6. So if we just look at what comes with Gateway, this would be a green. These would probably all be in green. Probably red, probably green, and then green with the colors. So green being Gateway, red being Old Tunnel. But then what about these lines? These are called the Erie lines, which are called the main line. It's vaguely the old Erie main line, not quite, but mostly. It's called the Bergen County line, the bypass of the Erie main line that passes through some places in Bergen County as opposed to Passaic County. And then this is called the Pascack Valley Line. This is Crayon, I mean, proposed Crayon by other people than me, but doesn't actually exist today as a passenger line, only as a freight line. Now these lines, the Erie lines, um, don't ever go into Penn Station. They're unelectrified. They feed into Hoboken, so they go like this. And the idea is to get everything into Penn Station, so you build a loop here. Not, say, something that gets them more directly like this, and yeah, you lose some warehouses, but they're warehouses. No, a loop. Now I've also been told that building transit-oriented development here is not possible because these are wetlands, but apparently doing a loop here is possible, aka they just don't like housing. And yeah, um, this should not be built. This is like, I mean, it's just bad for any kind of capacity planning, for any kind of reliability planning, for any kind of schedule planning. It's just bad. What they need to do is keep this out, electrify this, and then build another tunnel, which it would be able to do if it didn't cost $13 billion to build one tunnel. And because they're not doing this kind of long-term planning, they think, oh, let's just build unelectrified lines into Penn Station. There will be dual mode locomotives. These locomotives are extremely expensive and unreliable, but direct service to Penn Station, yay, it's the thinking. Again, very poor judgment on behalf of the management of New Jersey Transit. And I emphasize management. The line, I mean, the planners who are, let's say, my age tend to be more reasonable. The younger ones, same, but the ones who are, let's say, 40s and up tend to be terrible at their jobs. And then senior management are usually the worst, and the political appointees somehow manage to be even worse. Is usually the formula. Not going to talk about $22 million or 12. Oh, Hunter flyover. This is really nice. Finally, we're getting to something that I don't hate. Thank you. So there are a bunch of really important junctions that are at grade that need to be separated. So Harold, as I mentioned, is I don't think it crosses opposed traffic. It crosses the same direction traffic on a different line. But there are really important places to grade separate where you have grade crossings. This is probably the single most important, called shell interlocking. You might be able to see if you zoom in enough that this line is not actually the historic line. This is the historic line, but I'm literally proposing moving it a little bit with demolitions and takings to make this faster. This is not necessary for shell, it's just useful for higher speeds. But you see this little S here, this little S curve here. This is currently a 30-mile-an-hour curve. Now it could be 45, it used to be 45, but lots of safety theater, so 30 miles an hour right now. And remember, this is the busiest commuter rail line in North America. So now they're adding even more traffic that would cross here, that would cross opposed traffic. So right now, if you're a northbound, if you're a northbound train on the normal Metro North line, this one, and then you're a southbound train going to Penn Station, you will cross at grade. And they're proposing to add many more of these. And for some reason, that's not even on the wish list. It's one of the criticisms they've seen already on social media, that they're spending so much money and they're not even grade separating shell. What the fuck? Likewise, on the Long Island Railroad, maybe not as relevant as the Northeast Corridor, but still there's this interlocking called Queens. It's this one, same thing. There's at grade crossing of opposed traffic if you're going westbound here from the Hempstead branch. Very clear, this is Crayon, this exists. Or eastbound on the main line, this one, then it's an integrated conflict. Not conflict, an integrated conflict. Maybe not on the list because they're not doing LIR, I'm not sure, but okay, let's let that slide. And then the Jersey equivalent is called Hunter, which is this one. And I'm actually happy to say that they are planning to grade separate it. 300 million I would groan at, but if they can keep to it, I'm not gonna start demanding that every person involved in the project be used for unethical medical experiments. Um, okay, let's move on a little bit. Newark Penn Station, again, I don't know why they're spending so much on renewal of already existing stations. State of good repair is just a waste of money. Again, no transparency, not even the transparency that can be said, this line will open. No, it's just endless maintenance. Where specifically they consider themselves to be successful if they yoinked money from other places, right? From let's say feds or something more local, state, rather than based on any kind of service-based metrics. Again, these aren't people who use their own systems, certainly not off-peak, so they don't care. Okay, this I don't even know why suddenly it's this expensive. Harrison Force tracks is because there are certain parts on the surface that are not fully for track. Gateway state of good repair, as I said, it's all bullshit. Gateway storage yard. They're spending almost $2 billion on a new storage yard for the extra trains from the extra service that they're going to run for Gateway, which I mean one word long. Gateway, not Gateway. Rail yards don't cost as much. Rail yards maybe cost as much if you put them in Manhattan or close to Manhattan, but you don't need to, because what trains should be doing is running through, or if they don't, terminate and then go back. Not parking in or near city center. They need to provide symmetric in and outbound service, which is what they do here. And it's not because there's a lot of employment in the suburbs or a lot of policy interstate, quite to the contrary. European cities tend to be more monocentric and strongly centered than American ones. Now they are not high rise, so the center is not a few blocks of high rise. However, the center is much more spread out. In Berlin's several tens of square kilometers of much of the interior of the ring, and in Paris, likewise, it's much of city limits. But Paris is also less monocentric because there's some outer anchors like La Défense or Cergy or Marne-la-Vallée, but Berlin doesn't really have them. Neither does Munich, for example, and yet there's high all-day frequency in both directions just because of efficiency. If you're providing service, why are you trying to be unidirectional? Certainly why you're trying to park trains in city center. That's stupid. So, yeah, you might need some yard expansions, but it's like incremental things in places where land is cheap. And for some reason, that's being turned into a $2 billion project. Another bridge replacement, which is $2 billion. These are the bridges in Kearney. Kearney being it's a suburb of Newark. Rare place where people are here. This is Harrison, I guess. Rare place where people commute. Where people commute westward rather than eastward in this part of Jersey. I mean, I guess at this point they mostly commute east, but historically it would be a suburb of Newark. And for some reason, again, more bridge replacements for $2 billion. And again, you look at what the bridges carry and over what, and it's not something that's that complicated. And yet another thing is called the Delco lead for $800 million, and let's see what it's going to do. This is a safe haven storage facility south of New Brunswick to protect against damage from a storm surge. Now, to be very clear, this is because they actually did store trains in flood-prone areas during Sandy. Sandy was not a surprise. They knew about it in advance, but they didn't store the trains in there. But most of it, so it's, I think, this lead. And yet, at some point, you need to ask yourself if $800 million for flood-proofing is the optimal place to spend money, or if you're just buying $5 bottles of Fiji water. Midline loop, again, more stuff. Infill station for 50. I guess Jersey is less competent than Pennsylvania and Massachusetts, but more so than New York and Connecticut, which I can see. Elizabeth for 90. This is already a high level station, but they're reconstructing because why not? Um, um, and again, I'm skipping the small things unless they are very notable. I'm not going to talk about this because I don't actually know about power generation. I can say things like electrification costs, but at some point I'm not going to say something about everything. It's probably the biggest item that I can't strongly opine on. Um, this is the constant tension catenary issue where they're just spending way too much on catenary. The issue is with tension is that the traditional American catenary has something called variable tension, which means just constructed to lower standards, which limits speeds. This is why even though the tracks here are straight, I don't need the grammar. The tracks south of New York are straighter than north of New York, and therefore the average speeds are faster. The top speed is actually limited, or was until extremely recently limited to 135 miles an hour, even on tracks that work straight enough for more. On trains, it can do more. And they're replacing the catenary with more modern catenary, which is called constant tension, which also doesn't sag as much when the temperature is not what is expected. Except that it's at a cost that's at a multiple of how much it costs to build catenary. And remember, it's just the catenary, not the transformer. Um, so, okay, this is more New York City Metro stuff. Um, and we can move on afterward to stuff outside New York City Metro. Again, it's north to south, so Mid-Atlantic North. This is, I guess, Jersey, Pennsylvania. Again, station improvements for costs that bother me, especially, for example, Cornwall Heights. I mean, they're, for example, high-level platforms. That's not 50. I mean, SEPTA does this all the time. This would probably be more like 10, 15 for them if it's a longer station. New security improvements. What the hell? I mean, um, so Philadelphia 30th District Street District Plan. This is what note what they're saying. Conduct immediate and rail facilities. Where essentially they're making the station nicer, or what they think is nicer, which probably means less seating because they like hostile architecture. $850 million. Um, this is a bunch of extra stations. Um, this will add the third main track from Landleth to Wine. Um, restore track one from Landleth to Wine. I don't actually remember where they are. I need to actually check this to compare quotes to calendar. Landleth. So yeah, we can check. Okay, this tells me at least where Landleth is. Vaguely. Um, oh, okay, and now they're telling me, is there a map? Because notice when I'm saying Landleth and Wine, this is literally just, I guess it's the name of of an interlocking or something. So again, Landleth is here. Okay, so it's just outside Wilmington. Okay, and I guess the issue is that they're doing a third track. Okay, I see what they're doing. It's still a bad. It sounds like a bad project, but okay. So here's the issue. Um, Landleth, the issue. So the issue with adding more tracks here is that there's um very heavy commuter rail traffic in Philadelphia, but past Philadelphia, it isn't. Like I think they're planning on 4 trains per hour. Now it's 4 trains per hour that with way more stops between Boston and Providence, but it's still something that you can schedule around. You can do passing sections, and I don't think they run that um, frequently all the way to Wilmington. Um, it's more like maybe as far as Chester they're running frequently. Um, oh, it's Wilmington to Delaware. No, Wilmington to not Delaware to Newark, Delaware. Okay, so why is it why? Okay, so question: why is this $700 million? Is my main question. Um, Especially why they're triple tracking this, which is a very light commuter rail traffic section, 20 kilometers or something like that, or 20. Oh, Wellington to Claymont. Okay. Oh, so it's in the other direction. Okay, okay. Because, but still, I mean, first of all, why are you spending $700 million in triple tracking this? It's 10 kilometers. Like that gets triple tracked for 100, not 700. And second, I don't even think it's the right project to do. I mean, you should, in general, Americans like these long triple track projects, which are very lazily timetabled, and they should do 4 tracks, not 3, but in much shorter sections with timed overtakes. It's very uncommon in the United States, unfortunately, and it's to America's detriment. Okay, so they replace, okay, but that's not, okay, replacing the interlocking doesn't cost 700 million. I mean, there's 700 million, remember, Hunter, which is like a grade separation, is 300. Um, and Harold was supposed to be 250 before the wheels came off. Um, okay, and then there's okay, overhead catenary replacement to from Brill to Landless, same thing, but again very expensive. Conestoga. Oh, this is on the. This is not even on the Northeast Corridor. This is on the Keystone Corridor. All of these are stations that are between Philly and Harrisburg. I'm going to skip them. Um, Unless I see something extremely egregious, and so far I'm not. Um, Zoo interlocking. Oh wow, zoo interlocking improvement. Okay, I should maybe look at the further stages because if they can improve zoo, for example, canted tracks on the main section of it just to improve speed, that would be really nice. Well worth 50. Um, Again, I'm speeding through this because I don't want to talk too much about Philly to Harrisburg. Mid Atlantic South, I guess this is Delaware, Marylandish. Um, Susquehanna River Bridge replacement. So 2.7 billion. Now, bear in mind, this is also this might actually be the biggest river in the northeastern United States. The Susquehanna, it's this one. Um, Literally, its rise is just a big bay. How wide is it? A kilometer. Note that this kilometer wide river replacing this bridge is 2.7, and now but they're talking about I don't know 100 or 120 meters for 1.2 billion. And it's never that aggressive. Um, and especially not that aggressive when there's actually difficulty rebuilding the approaches here because you just don't have space in Autoclass. Maybe in Paravel you do, but the other thing also is that this bridge is not actually as bad as the Connecticut bridges. Um, in theory, it's a speed limit, but the speed limit is, I think, more theater than a real limit, and it's something that they can. No, it's not. No, it's not something I think they should bypass. In theory, honestly, they could use US 40 or something as a corridor to bypass. It's grade separated to some extent here, um, and then just go here. But even if they don't, this is not actually that bad. Um, and so certainly it's not worth 2.7 billion. This is silly. This is very silly. Um, Aberdeen for 26 million. Bush River again, another of these bridge replacements where there's just no accountability for anything. Um, Edgewood capacity, improve capacity by adding 3 miles of four-track corridor, create a new interlocking, upgrade them, and this is somehow 400 million. But again, this is all, and then another bridge replacement for 1.3 because why not? One, down Powder River. And then finally you're getting into Baltimore, and this is the big prize. Something that I'm going to skip over a lot of things for because it's called the B&P Tunnel Replacement Program. You say the B&P, this is the B&P tunnel. Sorry, this is the B&P tunnel, Baltimore and Potomac. Now, these tunnels may look very curvy to you, like very sharp, right? Yeah, well, yeah. So it took longer to get trains through Baltimore than it took to get them across the continental divide. The issue is that the northeastern United States doesn't really have a coastal plain. The fault line is very close to the actual coast, and usually the few places that are flat enough have city in them already, and this is especially bad in the case of Baltimore. Essentially, the only easy places to build a railroad through Baltimore were already urbanized at the time railways became a thing. Um, okay, Ben. I'm gonna answer your next comments when I'm done with telling people the history of the BNP. So the thing is, there were also two fiercely competitive railways through this: the Pennsylvania Railroad, which is where Amtrak runs, and the Baltimore and Ohio, which is today CSX. They hated each other. They were bit rivals, and they never cooperated unless forced to. So they built two separate alignments in the 1860s and 70s through the city. Bear in mind, like it was so difficult to get through the city that there was no through route in the city in the Civil War. Now, the main east. So the North was generally abolitionist, and the South was almost uniformly pro-slavery. But the abolitionism in the North was Boston, Philadelphia, and much more than these two East Coast cities, the non-coastal part of like the Midwest was much more anti-slavery. They had much more conflict, for example, with settlers from the South who wanted to bring in slavery. And the East Coast maybe was more used to compromises with the slave owners, and two cities in particular, New York and Baltimore, specialize in exporting slave cotton. So both of them had draft riots, which, as you might expect, included what I don't know if at the time it was called, but later it would be called lynchings against black city residents. And the mayor of New York City at the time proposed to secede with the South. Union troops had to occupy Baltimore and escort trains as they used tracks on city streets pulled by horses to move trains from north to south. After the Civil War, they did build tunnels, but they built two very compromised ones: two-track BNP and a one-track tunnel that I believe is called Howard Street by CSX. I mean, BNO and now CSX. And this is a rather wretched tunnel. It's a big reliability problem as well. The tunnels leak. So for about 20 years already, there have been plans to replace these with something that used to be called the Great Circle Tunnel, which I think I actually reproduce. Let me see if I reproduce the alignment correctly with my NEC done right thing. Yeah, roughly like this. So slightly longer, but single tunnel with the curves smoothed. There were plans in the 2000s. There was a really good. I'm essentially giving you a description from the study about this made in the late 2000s that said that this would be about $750 million, which is kind of inflated for a tunnel with no stations, but it's not horrific. And somehow this project exploded from 750 to 6 billion. Its scope crept to the point that instead of doing the original, which was a two-track tunnel, keeping the old two maybe for slower trains, it became 4 tracks. And each train and each tube would have to be designed for diesel freight trains as well, so much larger diameter, so that they could have double stacked freight with mechanical ventilation of the diesel and the catenary above the double stacked freight. Now, bear in mind, catenary above double stacked freight is the norm. China does that. India does that. Both of these countries are soon going to be fully electrified. China is comparable to the United States and Russia. These three countries are near tied for the world's busiest freight rail network in measured in ton kilometers. India is, I believe, a solid fourth. And so that's not the problem. But the mechanical ventilation and the huge ass tunnels, in fact, there are 4 tubes rather than 2. The original plan excluded freight because CSX said they don't need. They have their own tunnel. But meanwhile, CSX decided to piggyback, and the federal government didn't tell them, no, it's too expensive. Now, eventually, they did downscope certain things. I think they went down back from 4 to 2 tracks, but the costs did not fall. They stayed very high. Okay, so answering your questions, Ben, do I think that it could rein in costs if they assume control? The answer is yes, but only if they know what they're doing. So if the people who are currently in charge assume control, nothing will change. These are not people who go to Inotrans. These are not people who know what like integrated timetabling is. Don't India and China use non-standard containers? I don't think so. I think it's standard container heights. In India, they even do double stacked on well cars. Sorry, not on well cars, double stacked rate on flat cars. The US and China do them on well cars because otherwise double stacked freight is too unstable. But India has a border gauge. No, the catenary height in China and India is massive. By the way, the US, I don't remember where, but there are places in the United States where double stacked freight does run under catenary. It's very uncommon. Usually the catenary height is very low. I mean, relatively speaking, very low, but it can be raised if necessary. So essentially, you need the people to rein in costs to actually know things like integrated timetabling. I mean, if you ask someone like Vukan Vucic to chair and to pick his own people, probably people, maybe former students of his who he has sent to work at European railways, yeah, they could do it. Some of my commenters or followers that I know who work for such railroads, they could do it. Not the current people doing the NEC commission. They don't know enough. Like it requires. For example, note that I'm raising a lot of questions about bridge replacement, but I can't give you the answer, and being much more precise about issues like extra tracks that are not necessary based on how to timetable. So you also need people who know how to do cost saving not in mega projects because the bridges are specifically not designed as mega projects. The BNP replacement is, for example, or Gateway or South Station Extension, but most of these are done. Most of these bridge replacements that should be 200 million and are like more than $1 billion. These are specifically designed to bore the reader. They're designed not to be mega projects. They're designed to be just random things that are sold as, oh, we need that for state of good repair. Don't you worry your pretty little head about this pleb. As opposed to something that's supposed to be exciting to the public. Hell, I can point out to you, for example, the contingency rate are 30% here. Contingency should never be 30%. Contingency should be 10%. Like 30% essentially means that you're taking another 30% and setting on a fire. Remember, all contingencies. It's an insight that I learned from Marco Chitti. All contingencies will be spent. Contingencies are essentially a cover your ass thing by people whose entire understanding of construction costs come from like reading summaries of Fluvbier. And now Fluvbier is a good reference to read, but don't just read him, and also don't just read the summaries. And do I think CSX would be rerouted? I have no idea. I honestly have no idea. Like I don't know the Baltimore urban rail situation well enough to tell you how to create. Okay, 245 for the station, but note that I'm getting kind of bored by 200 when there's 6 billion that should be maybe a tenth of that. A connector between the Penn line and the Camden line, it seems, or they're saying enable efficiencies. Okay, $200 million. How much is it going to? Okay, you have your current maintenance costs are X. What are they going to be afterward? This is one of the things that they're not saying. Like, there's no cost benefit analysis in the United States. No, benefit cost analyses can be perilous sometimes, but when you're saying things like enable efficiencies, this is something that is measurable and actionable. That is to say, if you can measure the expected costs, not the cost, the expected benefits and cost reduction, and you can measure, and you can also make claims that can be tested, that can be acted upon and tested. And yet they're just saying efficiencies. Okay, at this point, it's mostly going to be small things until we hit, I believe, until we hit Washington Union Station. This one. Washington Union Station, this is a few aspects of it. The real one is long-term station expansion for $11.7 billion. Now, why does the station need to be expanded? Certainly not for capacity. The station has way too many tracks. Are they telling me how many tracks? No, but I'm sorry. But a Jimmy Wales can tell me how many tracks? 22. Some through, some terminating, some low platform, some high platform. I'm not going to look at the exact breakdown when you have 22 tracks on a station where the commuter traffic is, if I remember correctly, 8 trains per hour from the north at rush hour, 5 from the south they can run through, so it's, I guess, just going to be 8 through trains or something like that, and then something like 3 Amtrak trains an hour peak. Like, no. Like, this is half a train per hour per track. This is even lazier than South Station expansion by a large margin. And you know what? The and so it's not about capacity. So what are they doing? So they are saying capacity constraints, but that's bullshit. Coordinate with air rights. Essentially, they sold air rights. Congress sold air rights, thinking that it would fund something. So now they're deciding instead of saying, okay, you have air rights you can develop, instead of that, they're trying to make it some kind of a signature instead of something that's a tax generator. So you sell the air rights to a developer. It's a net sink just because of all the public coordination that's going to be need to be done for it's going to be needed to be done for a project where the actual revenue from the air rights is not actually worth that much because the problem is that building on rail yard is really expensive. The column placement is substandard. Is not. I don't say substandard. It's non-standard. To the point that, for example, Hudson Yards had to forgive property taxes to get developers to build. This is what it's going to be. Oh, thanks. And so the air rights are bullshit. They don't need to redesign the rail terminal. They're also talking about, you see, they're saying things like achieve compliance with ADA. They're already ADA compliant. I mean, there are specific platforms that aren't. Don't use them. You already have too many platforms. And also raising the platforms doesn't cost $12 billion. So all of this is just bullshit. And the actual plan, I mean, I blogged about this a few months ago. It's things like like building intercity bus facilities there for buses that compete with Amtrak. Private buses that compete with Amtrak are going to receive public money that is supposed to be about improving rail access. They're trying to entirely rebuild some passageways to create some kind of signature passageway involving H Street instead of just having direct access from H Street to each of these platforms with, let's say, elevators on one of the sidewalks or in the median. Probably it's the best. Like road this, elevators in the median, stairs, an elevator in each direction here. Instead of doing that, which would be very cheap, they're trying to be very fancy. And again, it's American style fancy, so hostile architecture where it's not actually a nice place for the passengers. All of this is bullshit. Again, there are some few things you can see here that are good but overpriced. Things like the Hudson Tunnel project. Things that are actually good, like Hunter. But most of this is tens of billions of dollars of waste. This is fourth track for 400 million. Um, Again, this is just all of this is just not all, but nearly all of it is just complete bullshit. Tens of billions of dollars that if you get them, I mean, here's what you should be doing, okay? Actual high speed rail in the Northeast Corridor is 15 to 20 billion with like inflation. And that's with bulldozing parts of Darien, a city so racist or a town so racist that the other 95% white flight suburbs in the area mock it as racist. I think the saying is Darien rhymes with Aryan. It's a sundown town. It's also anti-Semitic. Um, and it just brings that's not why you should bulldoze. You should bulldoze it because it happens to be in the way of a street. You see how here the freeway isn't straight either. It just happens to be this way, and I'm just explaining why the rest of the state is not going to actually defend. I mean, it's going to piss off Darien, but the other white flight suburbs are losing 10 buildings at a time, and they're going to get a lot of benefit from it. So I don't think they're going to defend Darien, neither socially nor technically. Yeah, spend the 20 billion, and then if you have another couple, another 30, 40 billion left, then you do things like Washington to Atlanta, you do New York to Buffalo, you punch through the Appalachians, Philadelphia to Pittsburgh, whatever you can afford, and then yeah, you get a nice high-speed rail network. Or if it's regional money, then you build Gateway, and instead of spending $13 billion in one tunnel, you spend $13 billion in four tunnels. It's just all of this is just bad planning. Again, I'm gonna draw an exception if they can build Hunter for 300, but other than that, I mean, no, just no. Um, I think I'm down with what has been a 2.5 hour rant, and I will take questions. So if there are no questions, we're going to end 9:40. There is very little lag right now. I think it's a 10-second lag, maybe. I'm waiting for this to flip. How much is this? 7. Yeah, it's about 10 seconds. I do it by counting the difference between here and here. And yes, it's matryoshkas, and essentially you see what you see is what I see when I see this and not this, but I mean, it's the same lag. So yeah, if people have more questions about this, then please fire away. This is going to be our next project at the Transit Coast project, making sure that this is not built at the currently proposed cost, but at not that it should be built. It should be built. It should be built, but for far, far less by removing all of these unnecessary items, these station expansions mostly. Figuring out what's wrong with the bridge replacements, figuring out how to how to do better timetabling, how to do better coordination of planning. All of this desperately needs to happen because there's tens of billions of dollars that the federal government has committed to spending, and they're all going to be set on fire if an itemized list like this is being built. Okay, I mean, Hunter is worth $300 million. Sure, it's not worth the tens of billions it's going to be wasted on everything else. So as I said, if people have questions, I will take them. If they don't, we can end. I'm gonna give people like a minute or two to type, but so maybe it's not going to be exactly 2:30, but if nobody has questions, it's going to be like 2:32, 2:33, 2:35. I mean, if you're watching on YouTube, you already know how long. Mm. Thanks for watching, there's Frankie. Um, and I don't know if my next stream is going to be Saturday or in a week. Probably in a week. Probably not this Saturday. And I don't know the topic either, but we will figure this out on Discord or social media, which at this point is much more Mastodon than Twitter. I mean, I still cross-post things to Twitter, but mostly I retweet outrageous things that I hear about homophobia and Putin. And Putin homophobia and Putin support homophobia. So anyway, thank you. Thanks for this, and I will see you in the next one, whenever that is. So ciao, ciao.